Today on Uncommon Sense, we speak about why the early bird does indeed sometimes get the worm. Well, hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense. My name is Joe Grabowski, VP for Evangelization here at the Society of G.K. Chesterton. And this is an unusual episode because I'm coming to you solo today. Just wanted to talk about a few things that are on my mind, but also because, and this is fitting for today's topic, none of my colleagues were available to record with me today, and we wanted to bring you a new episode. And it's fitting, as I say, because what I want to talk about is, and this is not casting any blame on my colleagues or anything like that, but just about how fast-paced life can get and how it can distract us from the more important things, and sometimes even be positively damaging in our lives. And so, what I want to look at is this pace of the modern world under a few different kind of categories, and this is all based on a essay that Chesterton wrote. This would be an essay that he wrote. Let me see. In 1907 for the Illustrated London News. And he's actually talking about journalism and why hastiness makes for bad journalism. And that essay, the title given to it, most of Chesterton's Illustrated London News essays weren't necessarily titled by him. He didn't have an editorial headline up above there. It was just GK's column in the Illustrated Daily Illustrated London News. However, the title that we've given to this and that it's collected under is The Hastiness of Modern Journalism. We'll get to that essay in a little bit, but I need to kind of set this up a little bit. And again, forgive me, and I apologize that you're just kind of suffering through me chatting at you today, but hopefully I do provide you with a few things to think about. But those who know me well, including my colleagues who usually get to restrain me in this context while recording these podcasts, they know that my mind sometimes goes mercurially in a lot of different directions, and I need to take time to slow down, which again is perfectly apt relative to the topic that we're going to be looking at today. Where I want to start is kind of an unexpected place, and that's in cardiology. Um, I'm not a cardiologist. I have not yet in my life. No, I won't knock on wood because that's superstition, and I'm not superstitious. But God willing, it will be a while before I have need to see a cardiologist. However, I was surprised to find, and you might be surprised to find, that a concept that we frequently associate with psychology actually arose in the field of cardiology. And the phenomenon or the principle that I'm describing is what is so-called type A behavior pattern or type A personality type. We've all heard this. I've used it for years. I've actually been referred to and sometimes referred to myself as a type A personality, imagining that I knew what that meant. And I think I did somewhat. However, I didn't know its origins, and I didn't know this kind of fascinating description that was originally given to type A behavior pattern, and what and why it was kind of coined. And it was coined with increased uh, prevalence to uh, clinical coronary heart disease. Or at least I think I'm getting this history right. And by the way, I stand to be corrected down below in the comments if you have any information on this. But I'm reading from a paper here. Let's see here from 1977 in the Bulletin of the New York Academy of Medicine, and this is by Meyer Friedman. That name is going to be important for a later term that we bring into this discussion. Meyer Friedman, just remember that MD. He was a cardiologist, and he wrote about the first corollary that was come up with between this type A behavior pattern and the increased prevalence of clinical coronary heart disease. that he came up with back in 1958. And there's a really great footnote from this paper that I'd like to read in full, because this is what was so surprising to me in learning about kind of what type A really is, rather than the kind of popular image that we might have of it. He writes here, type A behavior pattern is an action emotion complex that is exhibited by those individuals who are engaged in a chronic and incessant struggle to achieve more and more in less and less time. And thus, this gives rise to a sense of time urgency or, quote, hurry sickness. And hurry sickness is that other term that will be coming in. This is a term that gets coined by Meyer Friedman and his colleague in this paper back in 1958. And he footnotes, there's a footnote within a footnote. Going back, this is from an earlier paper, Type A Behavior and Your Heart, also by Meyer Friedman, where he refers to the definition of hurry sickness. But anyway, Type A is this action emotion complex, chronic and incessant struggle to achieve more and more in less and less time, leading to hurry sickness. He says that this behavior type uh, is among those who also usually, but not always, exhibit a free floating but well rationalized hostility. He says detection of the pattern cannot be accomplished by any self administered questionnaire of which I am aware because of the rationalizations of these individuals and their extraordinary reluctance to admit to any type of behavior less than meritorious. Um, he goes on to describe in this paper that he's writing about kind of why I think it's in this paper, or I came across it somewhere else, why type A became sort of the description. Um, he says he thought let's read here. He says there was another doctor, C.J. Van Slyke, in 1958, who suggested that the specific emotion action complex we observed in coronary patients be called type A, because he thought such an appellation might not so readily affront those psychiatrists who previously had not looked too kindly on our applications for federal grants dealing with the subject. After all, he said, you really are describing only that which you see, the behavior of your patients. Such a description, I don't believe, will annoy the psychiatrists. Um, so it's fascinating to me that this thing that we associate mostly with the description of people's psychology actually arose from observations by heart doctors looking at coronary patients and realizing that they had behavior types in common, which they saw as correlated to coronary disease and heart disease. Literally, this thing that they would call hurry sickness, that by wanting to do more and more, by having that, what does he call it in that footnote, chronic and incessant struggle to do more and more in less and less time, people were stressing themselves literally to death. So this kind of notion of hurry, I think, is all too familiar to us in this modern age and in our contemporary world. And I think those of us that are familiar with Chesterton can recognize that he also, in his time, was noticing this. There are a lot of places that this comes up. Um, I'm thinking, for example, of his description of hurry or crisis in What's Wrong with the World. Forgive me, I don't have the citation pulled up. I don't remember exactly where it is in that book. But he talks about the modern notion of hurry, how hurry is is a correct behavior in certain circumstances. For example, on a battlefield. He says when you're on a battlefield, it wouldn't do well to have every soldier be a Napoleon, right? Or every soldier be a Caesar on the battlefield, because even if they were all of that type, in the moment of battle, in the immediate crisis, you need one man, excuse me, you need one man to give the order and the others to follow. If they're all just giving orders, you're not going to get the job done. And so hurry in Chesterton's kind of account that he gives in What's Wrong with the World is associated with Caesarism. It's associated with the action that or the posture that we undertake in certain times of crisis, in situations of a dire need, where there's a real urgency and there's a real need for some men to listen and to be disciplined and to allow for one person to give the orders. And he says that in such a situation, kind of any one person will do. He says that, this is the circumstance where you'll listen even to the weak man because he is leader, because you recognize that even having a weak leader in a troop is better than having every man in the troop out for his own ends and doing his own thing. But he contrasts this Caesarism, this kind of urgency with which, in a moment of crisis, you forego your own decision making, or you might allow yourself to be rushed through decisions by hurry. You don't stop to second guess things. You don't stop to think about things. He contrasts this with the normal pace that life ought to take, the normal structure that life ought to take. For example, in a democracy, we should not flit from crisis to crisis. We shouldn't be motivated by by this constant sense of urgency and impending doom and catastrophizing as we move through the making of our laws and the shaping of our society. Again, all of this should sound very, very familiar to us today. The pace of journalism, the pace of 24-hour news cycles has only exacerbated this problem, which was already prevalent at the time that Chesterton is writing. I'm talking about What's Wrong with the World there. That's 1911, but also you could go back earlier to this essay that he writes in 1907 in the Illustrated London News, The Hastiness of Modern Journalism. And he says that hurry makes for bad journalism. Let's see if I can find some good quotes to pull out of this. Look at journalism. Run your eye down the columns of any really good newspaper or magazine and notice how often the thing fails in mere practical effectiveness because of its hurry. See how often smart journalism fails because of its smartness, that is, of its swiftness. I could, I could quote instances from everywhere, for the thing is too general to constitute any particular reproach against any particular paper. Once he goes into a specific example there, which won't usefully illustrate what we're trying to drive out of this. But he says a journalist nowadays is too hurried to be a good journalism. Insofar as journalism is an art like any other, it requires a little time like any other. It would perhaps be a mark of a very good magazine that it was always a little late in coming out. It would show that the men engaged on it were always concerned to get it good, not only to get it ready. It would show that they were trying to win by excellence and not only by date. By the way, I'm not making any apologies for any time the Gilbert magazine arrives late in your mailbox here. However, if it ever does, I do firmly believe that that would be because precisely we here at the Chesterton Society are striving to make it excellent rather than just make it ready. Chesterton goes on, we have all heard the old joke in answer to that statement that the early bird catches the worm. I mean the answer which points out that the worm was earlier than anybody. But the worm always is earlier than anybody. The lowest forms of life are always first on the scene, just as they were first on the scene in the actual evolution of the world. Why should man rise with the lark? It is his privilege to come last among the creatures, as he did come last, both according to the story of creation and according to the theory of evolution. Man rises last of all the animals, just as a king comes last in a procession. He enters last just as the hero enters last in a melodrama, with a thrilling and theatrical finality. No, my fellow men, if you get up too early in the morning, you are disturbing the grand allegory of natural evolution which is intended to lead up to you. You are lowering yourself to the early bird which catches the worm, or to the still earlier worm that he catches. And just as in the history of the earth and in the history of every morning, the worm is first on the scene, so is the modern journalist the first on the scene. The worm is the swiftest of animals. He is before everybody. But the nobler journalism would be, as you and I are, a little late for breakfast. Perhaps it would be an exaggeration to say that the best daily paper should be the paper that came out once a week, and the best weekly paper, the paper that came out once a month. But certainly a little delay in journalism ought always to be regarded as a mark of positive merit in its own line. And the great thing about this essay is that Chesterton actually kind of carries through this imagery. As early as this is in his writing, it's remarkably tight. Whereas I kind of associate that with Chesterton's later period in writing, where he really holds his arguments together. Whereas earlier in his writing career, he kind of paints a little more, um, uh, not impressionistically, but if you ever see his sketches, he sort of is flowing with his lines and stuff. Anyway, that's just my observation about his writing style. However, this essay, albeit early in his career, is remarkably tight, and he carries through this image of the bird, but he relates it now in the last paragraph not to worms, but to bullets, and we'll get there. But before we get there, again, just think about the timeliness of this. Think about how much this sounds like certain things that we know of in our modern context. The journalistic impatience and needless promptitude leads to a recklessness in mere logic, and the connection between ideas, which is very frequently funny. Um, he talks about there having been a case. Uh, the moment there was a case of maiming animals, the journalist immediately announced interview with Mr. Adagi. Now, Mr. Adagi was a man who was finally found innocent of having maimed any horses at all. Why should he be interviewed? Did the journalist expect him to give a vivid and picturesque account of how he had refrained from maiming horses? Did they expect him to explain in strong and lurid words how he could not commit the crime? Or did they think that, because he had once been unjustly accused of doing something, he had become in some mysterious way an authority and a specialist upon the things that he had not done? Um, this is a really fascinating insight and something that I never even really conceived of as a fault in our journalism, and yet indeed it is. And think all the more today of how many people's lives have been ruined simply by a news cycle surrounding the mere accusation of a crime. And that news cycle occupies the front page, it occupies hours of the day that the news breaks. And that individual's eventual acquittal or eventual clearing of the charges maybe doesn't even make the front page. Maybe it gets on to B7, underneath uh, the latest sports headlines. It might not even occupy a blip of the space, or a small area of the space which the former false news of the accusation had occupied. This is a very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous thing that is motivated precisely by hurry, by urgency, by crisis, and the pace of modern life, whereby we all kind of want to be there on the scene. We all want to have our opinions ready at the drop of a hat. Think of the urgency you feel in your own life on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever you happen to spend time, if you are so unfortunate as to be spending a substantial amount of your time online. Think about the pressure that you sometimes feel to have an opinion on the latest thing that just happened before you've had any opportunity to digest it, before you have any opportunity even to know whether or not you're actually aware of what's actually going on. I've lost friends over this, in fact. I remember back in sort of the hectic politics of the election seasons of previous years, and I don't want to get into all that, but I remember having arguments with friends simply because I wouldn't comment upon the latest stupid thing that some politician had done or said. Um, First of all, I don't know whether I would ever take the time to be read up enough to bother to comment, but everybody was expected, it seemed, to have an opinion on the spot, to immediately fall into camps. It was like there is a schoolyard game, and I can't remember the nature of it, where basically kids are like in two packs, and then you kind of call something out, and some of them will run to another one, and you change positions sort of at command. This is what modern life in the new modern public square, so called, of the social media space has become. And how many people in taking that moment to respond urgently off the cuff to give their hot takens on something have dug themselves a hole that especially because simultaneous to this drive in a society to have your opinion ready on the spot, we also have gotten rid of the virtue of forgiveness and second chances. And so somebody might react in a knee-jerk way, give a momentary opinion, their hot take on the latest news of the day, and be smeared for life as having been on the wrong side of history. This goes both ways in the political spectrum, by the way. I think that we all need to show more grace for one another, more allowance for having once or twice been wrong in our lives, in maybe not getting the full facts before speaking our mind on an issue. Again, we've seen countless examples of this. How journalists will rush and maybe mischaracterize a story, the identity of a certain mass shooter or killer, and what his or her politics happened to be at the time, uh, to the extent that that maybe is even relevant to our eventual understanding, to the extent that we need to know that as part of our appreciation of this news. All of that is question begging, let alone wanting to have it now, immediately, right away. And yet, this is what modern journalism drives towards, right? In this hastiness, they instantly try to access all of the back social media feed and reconstruct somebody's life out of that. I don't know about you. I would like to think that if God forbid, for any reason, I were to become infamous at any point in my life, uh, if the journalists were simply to pull from social media and try to paint a picture of who and what I am, they would hopefully not have a false. They would hopefully not have a false picture of who I am, but they would hopefully at least have just a partial picture. I don't think that that captures all of what I am, although I hope never to be mendacious or duplicitous in what I post online. I like to have integrity for that, and I think we all should. Anyway, some rambling thoughts there, but food for thought from an unexpected place, from Chesterton's criticism of the hastiness of journalism back in his day, that I think is, if anything, more relevant today than it was when he originally wrote. But as I mentioned, he goes on and brings back this image about the bird, and it's in the last paragraph, and I want to read that section and comment upon it as well. And let me see where I'm going to begin here. He says, he was talking about the horse, and this guy accused of maiming horses, who was eventually acquitted of maiming horses, and yet in the meantime, everybody had rushed to interview him to find out what he thought about maiming horses. Um, he writes here, I fancy it is only another example of the loss of ordinary rationalistic logic in the impetuous rapidity and restlessness of the journalistic world. If we concentrate so much of our concern and labor merely on making journalism rapid, we shall necessarily make it emptier and sillier, even as journalism. A bullet travels faster than a bird because a bird is made of life and a bullet of lead. A bullet is swift because it is stupid and heavy and small, like the brain of some modern millionaire. The bullet goes quickly because it is too dull to realize anything but its goal. The bird goes slowly because, being full of fire and passion, it enjoys not only its goal, but its journey. Things that are very lifeless are rapid. Things that are very living crawl and creep. The mills of God grind slowly because they are grinding and do not wish to get it over. but the mills of man grind quickly, because they do wish to get it over and to see the results, which is at least a little less repulsive than the process. The mills of the modern rich grind quickly and in a conscious agony, for they grind the faces of the poor. Some great Chestertonian rhetoric and rhetorical flourishes there, but this fascinating idea of lifeless things being rapid and things that are very living, crawling and creeping. It's very familiar for those of you who are avid readers of Chesterton, to a later adage or um, you know memorable quote of his that comes up in The Everlasting Man in 1925, where he writes, of course, that a dead thing can go with a stream, only a living thing swims against it, right? I'm paraphrasing, not getting the quote exactly right there, but dead things go with the streams, only living things can swim against the stream. And when we think about that, we think of, vitality and motion in the living thing. But it occurs to me that this is a through line all the way back to 1907 if you take that metaphor even more deeply and you contemplate the fact that, of course, the stream might be rushing very fast. Um, if you've ever watched salmon swimming upstream and jumping up the waterfall, their progress is indeed slow, precisely in proportion to the current running against them. And yet it is still the vitality and the life of the salmon, that enables them to move, albeit very slowly. A dead thing, you know, coming downstream with the water will, of course, move much faster downstream than the salmon is moving upstream. And yet, that in and of itself seems to be part of the lesson that Chesterton would have us derive. That the slow and steady progress, the plodding, the creeping and the crawling, which I love that image, um, we are the worm, right? Uh, you can try to avoid it by waking up really early in the morning, even earlier than the early bird. You can be that earliest of things on the scene, the worm. Um, but you can't escape it. That we have been made. You know, we're in this state of trial. We're fallen, and so we're kind of crawling and creeping and just plodding along and getting to where we need to be. And it's a hard go. It takes hard work, and it takes deliberation and slowness and the virtue of prudence, and taking time to make our decisions. And this is not what the world wants out of us. This is not what uh, Chesterton says in another place in Orthodoxy. There are 1,000 angles at which something falls, only one at which it stands. Falling is easy. Being swept along downstream is easy. Being rushed into something, into a fight, into a decision, into an opinion is easy. And yes, sometimes necessary. Um, and this is not to say that what a soldier does in just taking orders is easy. However, rightly considered, what the soldier does in obeying the order to charge doesn't quite have the same moral weight, the moral onus of responsibility that the general has in giving that order when he's taking, men's lives into his hands in that way. So it's always easy. It's always easy to fall, to simply be moved along by the current of the age, by our passions, by the expectations of others, by the pace of modern life, the hurry up, and the hurry sickness of the modern economy and social social fabric. It takes effort. It takes effort to slow down, to take a moment, and make up a decision. So, this will be a shorter episode than maybe you're used to here on Uncommon Sense, because once again, it has just been me flying solo, but I hope that I did give you some food for thought. If you're interested in reading more about this, first of all, tell me down in the comments what you think. these little brief video essays would definitely make it easier for the schedule than constantly needing two personnel to kind of put an episode together. Still, I don't think we want to make this a regular occurrence. However, by all means, let me know down in the comments what you thought about what I had to say today, what I had to share with you. Correct me if I'm wrong about anything. It might not be that type A was first you know taxonomized by cardiologists, that they were drawing this out and in consultation with a psychiatrist. I don't know, but it sounds that way from the paper that I read. I'll try to have a link to that paper in the show notes. I'll have a link to Chesterton's essay, The Hastiness of Modern Journalism, in the show notes. I'll have a link to What's Wrong with the World in the show notes as well, where you can purchase that on our store. If you're looking for other resources just to reflect on this idea, though, of hurry, and, you know, we will have more to say on this in the future on the podcast, because one of our mission points here at the Society is to advance Catholic social teaching. And I think that there is much more that could be said in this regard, and we'll probably want to say it at some point in the future. But I would encourage you to check out, I'll see if I can put a link to something along this lines in the show note. One person who has done a good job and is really interestingly adjacent to Chesterton in thought is Jacob Imam from New Polity, and now the College of St. Joseph the Worker out in Steubenville, Ohio. And Jacob Imam has written about how a lot of modern life, because of the military-industrial complex and certain material conditions, a lot of modern life is actually structured along soldierly standards, and we kind of don't realize this. The processed foods that we eat, for example, this is just one of the examples that Jacob will draw out in his writing. The processed foods that we were originally designed for the necessity of feeding men at the war front and keeping things preserved long and being able to package them and ship them and not having them spoil along the way. And then, because we didn't want to rush into production again and create those resources in the advent of another war, we decided to just incentivize the creation of those things. And we created the market for those things in the family home. So the processed foods and things that were originally emergency foods for soldiers at the front became the ordinary dining experience of Americans with their TV dinners, sitting in their living rooms in the interbellum period, because of the fact that the government and advertisers figured out that this was an expedient to keep the production lines going, to keep the jobs there, and to keep that readiness available for the next time that we had to mobilize for war, which did indeed happen in World War II. Some interesting food for thought there, right? It relates very much to Chesterton's notion of Caesarism and of how hurry motivates modern affairs more than we sometimes are able to recognize or admit. So I would like to give you this opportunity to reflect on hurriedness in your own life, on haste, what waste there is in haste in your own life, on the opportunity cost of rushing to judgment and making up an opinion, especially if you're going to post that opinion in a durable form online where you're never going to get it back. Even if you delete that tweet, somebody has a screenshot of it. And just how we can take time to slow down and maybe not reward those among content creators, among journalists who feed into this exhausting pace of modern life and the rush to get out there with an opinion. That's what I leave you with today. Again, check in the show notes for links to the various things I've talked about. Stay tuned on this feed. Please like, subscribe, do all those things to help us grow our audience, but also to stay up to date with the release of new episodes here on the channel. And I will be back with you again next week, hopefully with a confrere or a guest to discuss more of the wisdom of G.K. Chesterton, because as we know, Chesterton is always better with friends. Until next time, God bless you.